70 weeks. Let's see, we have talked about the captivity, the confession, we talked about the commandment, and the cutting off of the Messiah, and last week we were dealing with the coming prince. Now, I couldn't even begin to give you all the information. You realize that 3/5 of your Bible is about this period of time in those 70 weeks, and the majority of that's for the last 7 years. So there's so much. I cut out like 4 or 5 pages and then inserted 2 more, So if I don't hit on something particular you thought I might have hit on, it's just because there's so much information to cover. We talked last week about the destruction of Jerusalem and how that Jesus Christ prophesied that destruction came to pass 100% on the money. If there's ever a reason why somebody ought to know that this is the Word of God, is because of the prophecy in it. Dr. Ruckman used to say, God doesn't expect you to, never wants you to have blind faith. If you had blind faith, you'd be a Muslim. Because that's blind faith. They got nothing really backing up. They got a dead prophet. They got a book that has no prophecy in it and nothing in the future. That's blind faith. What we have is a book that has been tried and true through millennia of hundreds of prophecies, thousands of prophecies that have come to pass literally 100% without fail. That's how you know you have the Bible or you have the Word of God. So we can be confident in it. We talked a little bit, I mentioned why Satan wants to claim the temple. I hope that made sense to you. What he failed in his first attempt, he's going to try to succeed in his second attempt. His first attempt was a coup d'etat, where he would ascend the sides of the north in Mount Zion in heaven. And I don't know if he's going to sit in the throne with God or dethrone him. I'm not sure what all he had in mind, but he said that he was going to exalt his throne to the very height of God's throne. And he only said that in his heart. He never got a chance to actually even voice it out loud. The Lord heard him. And like we said, he handed him his hat and said, "See ya." Well, you know how sour grapes are. And the one thing he wants to do is self-fulfill the prophecy or what he said in his heart. And so he's going to try that down here on earth where there is another Mount Zion, another sides of the north, another seat that belongs to God that he could sit on and claim to be God. And as far as I can tell, it's as simple as that. And everything is moving toward that, whether you understand it. You get the conspiracy theorists, man. They got conspiracy theories over here and over there. We got the Masons and everybody. And then the Masons have nothing to do with another group. You say, well, how can that be? I said, listen, there is one conspirator around it all. He will make it all come together for him when the time comes. And the Lord will help him. Okay? So it's going to come to pass just like that. Just because you can't understand everything from all over the world and how it's forming, it'll come together. Trust me. It looks like a mess now, but it'll come together when he wants it to. And he doesn't have omniscience or omnipresence, or he's not all powerful. So he's playing a guessing game in some ways, and he's doing trial and error in some ways. Jesus said, if Satan's kingdom be divided against itself, how shall his kingdom stand? You realize he has that very situation in the tribulation? Where he's in 2 seats instead of 1? So he destroys the other one. Go over and read it, Revelation 18. The whore that he's been using for 2 millennia to get to form this government he wants to bring in a minute's notice he destroys her. Because he only wants 1 seat, folks. Just 1. Now, he'll sit in another if it'll get him there, but he only wants 1. All right, let's. We were talking about Daniel 9:26, and let me read that. It says, "And after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself. And the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be with a flood. And unto the end of the war, desolations are determined." One of the things that he talks about in the end thereof, he says there'll be a flood, and war where desolations are determined. When the Bible talks about and the end thereof shall be with a flood, when he talks about and the end is always a reference to that period of time, the latter part of Daniel's 70th week, the last 3.5 years or 42 months. It can be in reference to the Advent at the end, but it specifically is talking about that time period. And that's where we're going to find that flood, and that's where we're going to find all these wars that happen, or at least Armageddon happens at the end there. So that's what he's referring to there. You'll find the flood mentioned in Revelation chapter 12. I won't find it in the hymnal. Revelation chapter 12, verse 15 and 16. He says, and the serpent cast out of his mouth water as a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away of the flood. And the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened her mouth and swallowed up the flood, which the dragon cast out of his mouth. Now, that some say there may be a connection here between the early and latter rains all coming in the first month after a 3.5-year drought that Elijah has called down, or hasn't called down any rain. If all the rains come in the first month, obviously Jordan's going to overflow her banks. And you'll find a reference that about Leviathan, that something, and I'm going to have to paraphrase it because I can't get it. Huh? He is confident. He is confident he can draw up Jordan in his mouth. I think it's what it says. Yeah, it's in Job 42 or 41. 41. And the reference is that he thinks he can draw up Leviathan or draw up Jordan in his mouth, which is kind of interesting. But as far as the war goes, you'll find that all through the book of Revelation. But specifically Armageddon, and the major one at the end. A couple of references there. I got Revelation 6:4 where it talks about, I believe, the red horse rider comes down, or the red horse comes down, and of course that's going to bring war. Then chapter 12, verse 7 and verse 12, chapter 12, verse 17, chapter 19, verse 11, and a lot of those deal with Armageddon. And it looks like to me, when I study it, and I could be wrong, I don't think I'm much of a military man, but it looks to me like when the Antichrist armies come, they come from the north and the south. Somebody's coming up from the south because he tells that there's a slaughter at Bozrah south. Armageddon's north, or the valley of Megiddo, that flat area. And it looks like you have armies coming from the north and the south, and we call that a pincer movement. And when they try to come together, they try to get all. I don't know if they're trying to destroy the Jews at that time, but they're trying to get everybody within their grasp and captured or contained, and that's when the Lord comes back. And it says that the first slaughter is south. Of course, that's where he's coming down at. He's coming down at Sinai, and he takes the same route the children of Israel took through the wilderness, except for that 40-year jaunt. It's like a button hook, and it just comes straight up what they call the King's Highway, and he will fight against the Antichrist armies. It looks like in the south, and then also once he gets to Mount of Olives, he splits the Mount of Olives. It looks like it's like a bomb shelter, where the children of Israel go in there and they're protected, and he goes on up to Megiddo and wipes out a 200 million man army. That's a day's work, amen. Anyway, so in the end there's war and desolations. Now, one of the questions that's been tossed around is, why does the book of Revelation only deal with the 3.5 years instead of 7 years? Because, if you're reading it close enough, you can see that the second advent shows up like 4 times. And the reason is because there are 4 accounts. And it runs through one account, runs through it, and it's just like your Gospels. You have 4 accounts of Jesus Christ's ministry, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. You have 4 accounts of that last 3.5 years of the 70th week in the book of Revelation. And you can see how they run, and I don't have it broken down here, but you can see how they run, where it likes the seals and the vials and the trumpets, I can't remember, or the personages, but there's 4 separate accounts when you're reading through the book of Revelation of the tribulation, and that's the reason why you can't just put things in sequential order. They're overlapping. You know how the gospel accounts overlap? Same in the book of Revelation. That's why it's hard and kind of tough to pinpoint exactly when something's happening, because you don't know exactly how it overlays. But it is the last 42 months, at least from chapter 4 on. That we're certain of. You say, well, why is that? Well, I think it's for the same reason that you don't have, you only have snapshots and pictures of what happened with Jesus Christ before his ministry began. You have very little information. You got some information about his birth, but then you have what, one time when he's 12 years old, you have one snapshot of that, and then all of a sudden he shows up to begin his ministry. But the gospel accounts primarily deal with 42 months. Why? Because it's dealing with his ministry to Israel. Same with the Antichrist. It's when he begins sitting in that seat at Jerusalem. It's like that's the Great Tribulation, the last 42 months, and Revelation, the book of Revelation deals primarily with that time frame. But obviously there's some things going on before that. Okay? Now I don't think he's being born, but Jesus Christ had to be born, and he had to have a childhood and teenage years and then become an adult, right? I mean, it's there, but it's not discussed. All of it's not discussed. But there has to be some things that are happening before the Antichrist can just kind of... Because the reason I say that is there's so many things happening in the middle of the week, you can't just have him showing up that day. For instance, he stops the sacrifices. Well, you got to have some before you can stop them. He sits in the temple. You've got to have a temple before you can sit in it. You know, he sets up an image in the holy place. Got to have a holy place and got to have an image before you can set it up. Unless he's carrying all that on his back when he gets here, I just don't think that, you know, it's all happening in a day. He has to pass out the mark of the beast. That happens in the middle. He has to bring about world peace in one day. Now that's supposed to happen before. How in the world is he going to do that if he's not here? Now the answer, here's the answer that folks will give you. Some of them that believe then there's only 3.5 years left. There's an intermediate period of time. And my answer to that is, could it possibly be the first part of the week? This intermediate period of time you're talking about? I mean, why are we talking about periods of time that the Bible knows nothing about and that could be, I mean, it could be 150 years? Wouldn't you much rather know that it's a specific period of time? I mean, I'm going to read something to you today, Lord willing, that'll kind of show you that he needs some time, but he doesn't need a lot of time. This could happen really quick. All right, so let's talk about the covenant. That's the next thing. Daniel chapter 9, verse 27. And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. And in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. And for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate, even until the consummation, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. The first thing here says he's going to confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. Obviously, you know, now remember, the Bible's now telling you what this prince is going to do, okay? The mind of this prince. And he wants to confirm something for 1 week, and he wants to confirm it with many. First, we have to figure out what it is. Now, I've always been told it's the covenant of death and hell, and that may be, but that's not the covenant that he's talking about here. The covenant he's talking about here, Daniel mentions in chapter 9, verse 4. Somebody read verse 4 for me.
And I prayed unto the Lord my God, and made my confession, and said, O Lord, the great and dreadful God, keeping the covenant and mercy to them that love him, and to them that keep his commandments.
Yep. You know where that's quoted from? That's quoted from Deuteronomy chapter 7. Turn over there, Deuteronomy chapter 7. in verse 9 to 16. It says, therefore know that the Lord thy God, He is God, the faithful God, which keepeth covenant and mercy with them that love Him, and keep His commandments to 1,000 generations, and repayeth them that hate Him to their face. You see, verse 9 is wonderful. Verse 10, man, think about that. And repayeth them that hate Him to their face, to destroy them. He will not be slack to them that hateth Him. He will repay him to his face. Thou shalt therefore keep the commandments and the statutes and the judgments which I command thee this day to do them. Wherefore it shall come to pass, if ye hearken not to those judgments, and keep and do them, that the Lord thy God shall keep unto thee the covenant and the mercy which He sware unto thy fathers. He will love thee, bless thee, and multiply thee. And He will also bless the fruit of thy womb, the fruit of thy land, thy corn and thy wine, thine oil, the increase of thine kine, and the flocks of thy sheep, and the land which He sware unto thy fathers to give thee. Thou shalt be blessed above all people. There shall not be male or female barren among you or among your cattle. And the Lord will take away from thee all sickness, and will put none of the evil diseases of Egypt, which thou knowest, upon thee, but will lay them upon all them that hate thee. And thou shalt consume all the people which the Lord thy God shall deliver thee. Thine eyes shall have no pity upon them, neither shalt thou serve their gods, for that will be a snare unto thee. So what we're talking about here is the Mosaic covenant. Listen, when the Antichrist comes, he's just not going to come in his own. He's not going to be able to come and not agree with this. There's got to be some subterfuge, and that's it. What he's going to do is he's going to come and confirm the covenant. What? The Mosaic covenant. What does he want done? Remember what we talked about last week? What does he want to do? He wants to sit in the temple, right? Now, for there to be a temple, there has to be what going on? Sacrifices. You know what calls for sacrifices? The Mosaic covenant calls for sacrifices. Look at Exodus chapter 19. Exodus chapter 19, and look at verse 5 and 6. Now therefore, if you obey my voice indeed and keep my covenant, then ye shall be a peculiar treasure unto me above all people, for all the earth is mine. And ye shall be unto me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words which thou shalt speak unto the children of Israel. Look at chapter 24, verse 7 and 8. He says, and he took the book of the covenant and read it in the audience of the people, and they said, all that the Lord has said we will do, and be obedient. And Moses took the blood and sprinkled it on the people, and said, behold, the blood of the covenant which the Lord hath made with you concerning all these words. Okay? So, when he talks about confirming a covenant, he's talking about the Mosaic covenant. But the funny thing is the way he put it, he said, confirming the covenant with many. And I said, what does that mean? And you know what came into my head? He's confirming the covenant with the nations. He's confirming the covenant with the United Nations. He's drawing up a 7-year treaty because he's going to confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. He's drawing up a treaty for 7 years, and after that 7 years, he'll bring in world peace. Who wouldn't take that? There isn't a swimsuit or one of those beauty contest contestants that wouldn't take that, world peace. Look in Deuteronomy chapter 4. Now, you say, well, many have tried that or tried anything and never worked. Yeah, but you ever had a man that had supernatural signs and wonders? A man that, not like Benny Hinn, where you never can confirm whether the guy ever did anything, but I mean right before your very eyes, can heal a blind man. You ever seen anything like that? I guarantee you once the world gets a hold of that, believe me, that man's going to have some powerful words. And the one thing he's going to want to do is side with Israel right away and confirm the covenant and say, look, you need to let them erect that altar and that temple. You know, let them have their sacrifices. What does the Bible say when they shall say peace and safety? Deuteronomy 4. Here's where the gig is up right here, man. Deuteronomy chapter 4. Look at verse 13 to 19. And he declared unto you his covenant which he commanded you to perform, even 10 commandments. So this is the basis of the covenant, or the things there to perform. And he wrote them upon 2 tables of stone. And the Lord commanded me at that time to teach you statutes and judgments, that you might do them in the land whither you go over to possess it. Take ye therefore good heed unto yourselves, for you saw no manner of similitude on the day that the Lord spake unto you in Horeb out of the midst of the fire. The reason you can't make an image to the Lord is because nobody knows what he looks like. I've always said if I had a picture of Jesus Christ and I showed it to you, that would be the image of the Son of God. But because nobody has it, how can you make something if you don't know what he looks like? Okay. It says, lest ye corrupt yourselves and make you a graven image and a similitude of any figure, the likeness of male or female. Do you see what's going on here? The covenant, and the main one is about them not making an image of anything on this earth, male or female, creeping thing or whatever. What does the Antichrist do in the middle of the week? He makes an image. Listen, that's the first commandment. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Actually, the second one, thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image. You get it? Now here's the thing. The Catholics don't have one problem with that at all, because they take out the second commandment. And if you ever go to a civic center where they still have the 10 commandments erected, you'll know whether a Protestant erected that or a Catholic by seeing that the second one's gone. Because they got all kinds of graven images. They got them hanging around their neck. They got them all along their church. They got them in the backyard. They got them hanging from the dashboard of their car. You know, they got one back there in the bird feeder in the backyard. All kinds of idols, all kinds of images that are used in worship. Okay? So can you kind of see what's going to happen? He goes along there, and then all of a sudden he sets up an image, and all them Jews go, That is not good. Now this covenant that he makes with the United Nations, I mean, if you want to call that the covenant of death and hell, I'd probably agree with you, because that's where it's all going to lead. But the covenant in particular that he's talking about is the Mosaic covenant, because he is with Israel. He is with them in the sacrifices. He is with them in rebuilding the temple. In fact, we're going to look here in a little bit, see what kind of help he's going to be to them. He says there that he'll confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. I already said that. The reference over there when it says when Israel shall say peace and safety is 1 Thessalonians 5 verse 1 to 3. And by the way, just because he says 7 years, he's not going to make 7 years. He doesn't even make 3.5 years before everything falls apart. So just because he makes the covenant doesn't mean it lasts. Or he confirms the covenant with many doesn't mean it's going to last. Now, let me talk to you about the temple. I'm going to read you something. It's brief, because I briefened it, if you will, because it was very long. And this was written in January of 1998. It says the plans for the temple. According to the Temple Institute spokesman Rabbi Richmond, detailed blueprints for the third temple have existed for the past 4 years. So we're talking about 1994. They already had the plans. It says the plans were necessarily drawn according to the primary sources for this information, the Bible, Josephus, and somebody, Midot or Midot, M-I-D-D-O-T, have no idea who that is. Additions to these ancient specifications have included the use of electricity and other modern improvements that agree with the law. In other words, probably got to have a hookup to the internet for the image, you know, especially Facebook. Anyway, I'm just kidding, you know. Other structures pertaining to the temple's function have also been planned or actually built under the auspices of Rabbi Shlomo Goren. The 70-seat Supreme Court building that housed the Sanhedrin in temple times has again been constructed. So even though the temple itself hasn't been constructed, they're constructing the buildings around it that need to be there already. You know, in the general area. Listen to this. The protocol for the temple. Based on the rabbinic authority, they contend that even though heaven must send the prophet and the Messiah as a sign of redemption, this will not be done until there is a national repentance and a desire to begin the task of rebuilding. Now, what sent a shiver up and down my spine is he mentioned the prophet and the Messiah. Well, when the Antichrist comes, it's the Antichrist and the false prophet. Okay? And this thing has to do with a desire to build, not necessarily building. In other words, and I am telling you, man, if you hear that Israel is planning on rebuilding, then in other words, they're actually active in setting a date to rebuild or to restart the sacrifices, better pack your bags. Because this thing talks about when those sacrifices begin and end and gives you a time frame. And at the end of that time frame, Jesus Christ comes back. But what I'm saying is we're getting out of here before that. It says the preparations for the temple. Since 1987, a group of rabbinical researchers, designers, and craftsmen under the direction of Rabbi Israel Ariel have been creating in the Jewish quarter of Jerusalem what they call a temple in waiting. Among the items that have been or are in the process of being created are, now remember, this is 1998. This is all done. Apparel for the high priest, his 8-layered woven robe, the golden crown worn on his head. I've seen pictures of it. And his jeweled breastplate bearing the names of the tribes of Israel. That's that ephod with the stones in it. All they got to have is the Urim and Thummim. We'll talk about that in a second. Priestly garments and the blue-purple dye for the priestly fringes on the prayer shawl. And 11 sacrificial incense spices, urns, ewers, E-W-E-R-S. Incense pans, forks, shovels, and carts for burnt offerings, the gold and silver vessels used to dispense sacrificial blood on the altar, the golden laver, flask, and measuring cups used in the libation offerings, vessels for the meal offerings, the lottery boxes for the Day of Atonement. I have no idea what that's about. The mortar and pestle and stone vessels for grinding and holding the purifying ashes of the red heifer, and the golden menorah, leaving instruments and oil pitchers for replenishing the oil for its light, silver trumpets, 2 found over in Numbers chapter 10, and a barley altar. Okay? The Ark of the Covenant. This is interesting. While a replica of the Ark of the Covenant is prominently displayed in the Temple Institute's Visitor Center, spokesmen for the Institute publicly state that they believe the original still exists in a secret chamber located under the Temple Mount beneath the site of the Holy of Holies. When access to the site is possible and all other ritual requirements have been met, they expect to be recovered and take its place within the restored temple. In other words, you see that Ark of the Covenant, what sat on top of that was the mercy seat, which is the seat that Jesus Christ should be sitting in. That's where the devil wants to sit. You think they'll find that ark? I do. Now the thing is, I thought, well, how can they find it if it's up in heaven? I'm getting ahead of myself, but there are two. According to the rabbinical tradition, this is about the priest. Even though the geological records of the temple were lost, the Jews were scattered throughout Gentile lands, those of the tribe of Levi were forbidden to alter their names, which connoted their priestly heritage when assimilated into foreign cultures, Thus we continue to this day to have Levi's and Cohens and derivatives of those names. Recently, a more scientific test to verify those of priestly lineage has appeared. In studies of male Jews claiming descent from Aaron, it was found that they had, as a group, uniquely carry an aberration of a Y chromosome. Because of each person's DNA is as individual as a fingerprint, this characteristic linked these men together as a separate and identifiable group that must be traced back to an original ancestor. Isn't that wild? Listen, all they'd have to do is find the grave of one confirmed Levitical priest, one of them mentioned in the Bible. And they could draw the DNA and they could tell who's of the priestly line from that. Then the purification thing. According to the rabbis of the temple movement, in order for a temple to be rebuilt today, those who would enter the area of sanctity and perform the holy task must first be ritually pure, because all Jews have become ceremonially unclean in the diaspora, or the dispersion, and only means to reverse this condition and establish a functioning priesthood is through the ashes of the red heifer. Okay, you all know what I'm talking about when they talk about the ashes of the red heifer? So there are three things that I can see that Israel needs. One is they need Urim and Thummim, possibly, unless they're going to identify their priest through DNA. You'll find in Nehemiah chapter 7, where they used this to identify whether they were priests or not. You say, what is it? Don't know. Has something to do with lights. Nehemiah chapter 7, verse 63 to 65. He said, and the priests, the children of Habiah, I guess, and the children of Kaz, the children of Barzillai, which took one of the daughters of Barzillai, the Gileadite, to wife, and was called after their name. These sought their register among those that were reckoned by genealogy, but it was not found. Therefore they were as polluted, put from the priesthood. And the Tershatha, that's like another name for a governor, and the Tershatha said unto them that they should not eat of the most holy things till there stood up a priest with Urim and Thummim. Now what little we know about this is when they had that ephod on, with those stones representing each tribe, this Urim and Thummim somehow was incorporated into this ephod, and it would light up that vest. So if someone said, well, what tribe am I from? It would just light up what tribe they're from. That's what I've heard. And because the Urim and Thummim has to do with something about lights. And I know it has to deal with those stones. And they've made the ephod. I just read that to you. But they haven't found the Urim and Thummim. The other thing is that they would need the ashes of a red heifer. And if you go to Numbers 19, verse 1 to 10, he talks about that. It's very specific. What that ashes were for was for the purifying of everything that's used in the temple worship. But the question is, how can you have the ashes of a red heifer for the purifying? How can you make the sacrifice in the first place without everything being purified and sanctified? You know, you always hear the stories about, you know, out in Montana, they've got a red heifer, just as pure. It's all red. And what they do is they actually count the hairs to see if there's any, how many gray hairs or so many gray hairs allowed on it or something like that, you know. And I don't know, maybe there is, you know, there's some red heifer. I'd sell them one. I mean, but wouldn't you think it'd be more expedient that if they found the Ark of the Covenant and they opened that thing up, because it's like a chest, they opened that thing up and guess what they found? The last ashes of the last heifer that was shed. Then they could go ahead and purify all their objects and start their daily sacrifices, kinda. All right. So the last, another thing they need to find besides the Urim and Thummim, the last ashes of the red heifer, would be the Ark of the Covenant. Now, without me going into the specifics of this, in Deuteronomy chapter 10, verse 2 to 5, you can write that down, Moses makes one. He makes an ark. It's of shittim wood. He makes that ark, and he puts in there the tables of stone. You can read it for yourself. He made it. The next one that's mentioned is mentioned in Exodus chapter 25, verse 10 and 11, where it says, and they made an Ark of Covenant. And this one, the one he made was just made of wood. This one was not only made of shittim wood, but it was layered in gold. It was covered in gold. Whereas the first one doesn't say that about it. Now here's what I'm going to tell you, because I don't know a lot about it. One of those arks is missing. Revelation 19:11 says that John saw the ark of his testimony up there in glory. And I believe Dr. Rugman says one of them got raptured. Okay, I don't know which one. Kind of thinking the gold one's up there. Just me. But there's still one down here. And if it says what it means what it says, the the stones are in that thing. The Ten Commandments are in there. There could also be, I don't know if Aaron's rod that budded would be in there. I don't know if the pot of manna would still be in there. But I know that Moses put specifically those tables of stones in that ark which he made. If they find that thing, and they can find, I would imagine if those priests hid that, they would have also hid the ashes of that red heifer, knowing that one day they would start up sacrifices again, just like they did after the first temple. They would have definitely hid an ephod with the Urim and Thummim. You would think they would have hid that. So I don't know what all they're going to find, but I think that Israel's going to find what she needs to begin the daily sacrifices. That much I'm sure of. All right. Let me see here. I want to make sure I've said everything I wanted to say, because there's a lot to say. I'm going to throw up something that I don't understand. And if you can help me, help me. When they went back under Ezra and Nehemiah, under Ezra, they laid the foundation of the temple, and actually they built the temple. I don't see fire coming down from heaven and restarting and rekindling. Because you know, when the first tabernacle was constructed, God answered by fire on that sacrifice. And that was the fire they kept going the entire time they were in the wilderness. It never went out. It was the fire for the altar. It was the fire for the altar of incense. It was what they lit the lamps with, because anything else was what? Strange fire. They carried those coals. Probably a dozen of them carried coals, just to make sure, you know. But they made sure those coals, they even had hewers of wood that made sure there was plenty of fuel. But they would carry those coals wherever they would, restart those fires from that original fire, or rebuild those fires from that original fire that came down from heaven. When Solomon built his temple, God answered by fire. But when I read Ezra and Nehemiah, and I've looked, unless I'm missing it, he doesn't answer. He doesn't rekindle that fire. It makes me wonder where he had no intention at that time of blessing their sacrificial system, even though they were sacrificing. I don't know. I don't understand it. But you know, they were never a nation at that time. Israel has not been a nation since like 606 BC till 1948. They were a nation subservient, tributary to other nations. It just whoever happened to have the upper hand, they were subject to. And that was all the way through. I mean, even in the time when Jesus Christ shows up, they're tributary to Rome. So, I'm not sure the Lord would have given them the fire that came from heaven to start their sacrificial system again, because they were not indigenous or autonomous. Now, that's the only thing I can figure from that. But look at Revelation 13:13. I don't think the Jews are going to have to worry too much about getting fire from heaven. And I beheld another beast, verse 11, coming up out of the earth, and he had two horns like a lamb, and he spake as a dragon. And he exerciseth all the power of the first beast before him, and causeth the earth and them that dwell therein to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. And he doeth great wonders, so that he maketh fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men. Uh-oh. Imagine someone comes along, and let's just say that person comes from outer space. I mean, I believe he's going to duplicate Christ in every way. Jesus is born, Judas was born. Well, this time around, nobody's being born. They're coming back. They're coming from space. So I believe that the Antichrist will come from outer space. I lost my thought. Talked myself right out of it. The minute he gets here, begins politicking for Israel. Standing up for Israel. More like a prophet for Israel. I'm not sure how he's going to play it. But he's going to support them starting their sacrificial system. That's going to be his primary goal. He'll put the Muslims at bay. I believe, you know, whereas in the 1960s we always thought communism was going to be the thing that pushed everything over the edge. But I really believe that it'll be the Muslims, at least right now I think it'll be the Muslims that do this. And that is creating a problem and then solving the problem. And if he can incite, listen, when he comes in, the Bible says he is the white horse rider. He's got a bow but no arrows. That's because he comes in peace, sign of a bowman, peace. And when he comes, things have to be upside down. You know when the cavalry comes rolling in on the white horse? Okay. And that's exactly the way he's going to play this. And he comes immediately siding with Israel. And what better way to get Israel on your side than not only to support the Mosaic covenant, but all of a sudden can pray and bring down fire from heaven for that first sacrifice. Unforgettable. Remember, the Bible tells you that the deception will be great. And it said that possibly even the elect would be deceived. That's how deceptive this is going to be. This is a guy that's coming going to be talking about world peace, man. Peace, peace, peace. All right. Got to stop. I'm getting nowhere fast. But I'm... All right. Is there any questions?